What's up guys, this is Bus here and you're coming at you with another video, and today I want to talk about a long forgotten card game that was produced by Bandai back in 2000. It's the Gundam MS War card game that I've fairly recently found out that not only did it exist, but the cards are pretty amazing looking in my opinion. I quite like the simplistic style of them, and there is a community out there as well that still cares about this card game. And I just want to share my thoughts with you guys about this card game and where I think this particular game could be headed. Also, I want to give a massive shout out to CCG Replays. He's done a nice, extensive video about um, some revised rules that his team and himself has worked on a couple of years ago. And just really picking up from there, I was quite lucky to get two Oz starters. I also have a few more cards on the way, but to find these cards is pretty difficult, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. There are two starters that came out for the first set of the game, Oz and Wing Gundam. The Wing Gundam has like a blue sort of cardboard box that he came out in. And then there were, I believe, two more sets. One of the sets is called the Endless Waltz, and I believe there's another set, but I'm not sure what that's called because it's really difficult to get information on these cards. However, the group of people who still look after this game, they have an extensive library of the cards scanned in, and it is available for anybody. If you want to proxy a deck and start to play around with that, then you basically have access to those pictures, and you're more than welcome to obviously go ahead and try and fiddle around with these cards a little bit, because as I said, they are pretty amazing looking. And you know, if you have watched the any of the Gundam animes in reality, although this one particularly focuses a lot on Gundam War, Wing Gundam, then you would certainly appreciate this card game. Now, Wing Gundam came out in '95. This card game came out in 2000, so obviously normally you'd think they had a lot of time to work the rules out. They didn't. The rules are atrocious for this game, and I think anybody who you will speak to or who you would speak to has ever played this game based on the basic rules. It's yeah, it's not great. So luckily, as I mentioned previously, there are some revised rules out there. They have reworked the basically the cost system of the game. They got rid of the Rebel Forces rules, which thank God they did because it was absolutely useless. And just really streamline the game a little bit. I also myself have some additional ideas that I would like to hopefully explore in the future. In particular, making the battlefield cards, the locations in this game, more usable. The original rules basically allow only one battlefield card to be put in play at any point in time between the two players, and as soon as you play your own battlefield card, your opponent's is destroyed, which just makes it too big an impact for these cards to be played. As you have sometimes you have easy, sometimes you have quite hefty requirements to get these cards into play. They also cost you resources, and the effect they give, even though they are good, the battle scars, i.e. what you lose if one of these battle cards is sent to the basically graveyard. It's the well, it's technically the dry dock, although I think it should go to the sort of like the banished pile, because once thematically, once one of these bases or locations are destroyed in the anime, they don't rebuild them realistically, so they should go to the defunct pile in my opinion. But it's very risky to play these with the current rules. My idea would be to have each player being allowed to have one of these in play, and when you do your attacks, the first damage will go against the location you have in play regarding what it can take as much damage as its resource cost is. So like the New England's base here that you can see, if it is in play, your opponent attacks. If you don't defend, the first thing that happens is you're not defending your base. So if your opponent hits you for 2 damage, let's say they attack with a Taurus, for example, Taurus hits for 4, as you can see there. Taurus is for 4, so 2 of that damage would go against your base, then this would go into the defunct pile, so you can't really get it back into the game unless there's an effect or 2 that brings it back to the game. And the rest, the other 2 damage, would then go against your deck, because there are 2 ways to win in this game. You either destroy 6 of your opponent's Gundams, or you deck your opponent out. And I think that would just generally make, you know, your field cards a lot more playable. First of all, both players could benefit from their own stuff, but there are also some cards out there that give benefit to both players, and an excellent example of that is the St. Gabriella School, which allows both players to draw an additional card in their preliminary phase. So, you know, if I would battle against an opponent who has a St. Gabriella School, I would maybe think twice if I even want to attack them, because I'm also benefiting from drawing the extra cards, and maybe I want to give them another turn or 2, build up my forces a little bit more, and when I've taken enough advantage of my opponent's location, then I go in for the attack. And because this has a resource cost of 1, obviously it only takes 1 damage for it to be destroyed, which I think goes quite well thematically, as well as normally a school wouldn't really have any defenses to help, you know, protect it, whereas you have some other locations in this game that may cost you, you know, 2, 3, 4 resources, maybe even more, to put them into play. Let's see if we have an example of that. There you go, Space Fortress Libra. Which again, if you have watched the anime, it's quite a hefty. Well, it's a space fortress. It does cost you 4 resources as well to be played. So obviously, its defenses would be much higher as well. So again, I think just maybe a little bit by coincidence, maybe not, but they work out pretty well with, you know, their resource costs being the defense. On the other hand, if I just show you guys a few other cards that are in this game, we obviously have loads of Gundams, and they form obviously the main part of this game. So we got Cancer here, we got Gundam Epion here. Another rule that the community has introduced is that at any point in time you can have only one sort of unique Gundam in play. So any card that has Gundam in its name, like Gundam Epion, you can only have one of it in the play. But if you want to play another Gundam Epion, you can. And if you have another one that, let's say, has a cost of 4, then you can play this one with the cost of 6 by basically putting this on top of the 4 cost cards and only playing the extra 2, which I think is pretty nice. Again, it allows you deck building to have sort of like more of a curve system, which is very important. You know, any successful card game has some sort of a curve system. Like if you think about Magic the Gathering, the best way to break that game is if you bring more lands, more mana sources into the game, and so you can cast more cards. And with the previous rules of this game, you would have to basically discard cards from the top of your deck, depending from the amount of the cost of the cards. The community has changed that, which again I think is brilliant. So beginning of your turn, you get 3 resource points, and you get an additional 1 for each Gundam that you have in play. And you lose all of your points at the beginning of your turn, and then you restart from 3 plus however many cards you got in play. Now again, building on that, my thought was that if running battlefield cards would be a thing, so both players can have 1 battlefield card in play. First of all, that would actually make a lot of cards a lot more playable. Cards that come down and destroy a battlefield card, which there are some in play. There are some pilots in play. in the game. There are some Gundams in the game that basically come down, or you can do something to destroy an opponent's battlefield card, which would become a lot more useful if there wasn't a thing where I play mine and I just get rid of yours. So I think that would enable a lot of cards. But also, my idea with the resource system is you still get the 3 points at the beginning of your turn in the preliminary phase, is what it's called. And then you get an additional resource point if you have a battlefield card in play. And you get an additional resource points after every 2 cards you have in play, and those 2 cards can either be Gundams or pilots. So if you have a Cancer and an Apian in play, and you have Space Fortress Libra in play, you would then get 5 resource points. Or let's say you have Zex and you have a Cancer in play, again you would get 5 resource points for that. So that also encourages you to, very similarly to the previous system that the community has already introduced, to first of all really make decisions whether you're going to attack predominantly or maybe hold back a little bit and defend. But you also get rewarded for playing pilot cards. At the end of the day, your Gundams can attack without pilots, but generally speaking, pilots tend to cost a little bit less than your Gundams. So you can really go into a deck building where you may have, a little bit more pilots, but some of the heavy hitting sort of Gundams, Gundam Zero, again, I've shown you the 6-cost Apian is quite an expensive one actually to play. Or you can go in a deck direction where you might be running some weenies, where you're not really running any Gundams that cost a lot more than 3. In fact, you probably want to run some Gundams that only cost 1 and 2, so that you can bring 2 down in one turn, and the next turn those 2 will give you an additional resource point to spend. So even with this system, I think that the one thing you really gain is just by being rewarded more for having pilots. One of the big downfalls of the original sort of rule set of this game was that you don't really get rewarded for having anything in play. Besides, first turn you drew into your Apian, you then mill 6 cards from the top of your deck, play this guy, wait for the next turn, or this is mostly best for defending. You can't do any damage to your opponent's supply base, so if your opponent takes a direct hit, the Apian wouldn't normally do anything to it. But then you might then want to pair this guy up with Tubarov, and in that case, if your opponent doesn't defend against Apian, then your opponent will have to discard 5 cards from their hand, because all battle damage affects any battle damage affects your opponent's hand instead of their supply base. So if you pair up these 2 guys, for example, yes, your Apian will go down to 4 attack/defense. I quite like that it's only one number. It's not confusing. But it would still, if your opponent takes the damage, they would take 4 cards out of their hands, which I think it's pretty sweet. And it's pretty cool. And again, if you look at this card, probably not many players would normally run this, even with the current, enhanced rule set, I would say. But it's a 1-cost, so, if you get this guy down, maybe get a Zex down as well, then next turn these 2 guys will give you an additional resource point. Then you can play, obviously, some sort of an early location. And I think another thing that should definitely be introduced is that you can replace your own location card without suffering from the battle scars. So if you decide to play another battlefield card, you can, and you're not going to take the battle scars from it, only if your opponent attacks it, but it still goes to the defunct pile, which I think should realistically be the case with these. Again, just encourage players to play more of these cards, because their effects are amazing. There are some great promos out there as well. Pretty hard to find, though. But definitely just, making the game more thematic, making the game more playable, I suppose, is what I am suggesting. But generally speaking, these cards, they look absolutely amazing. I mean, just by pretty much having a 2 Oz starters and maybe a booster's worth of Wing Gundam cards. I really appreciate the simplicity of the cards. That you got a cost to it. You got an affiliation, massive area left for the art itself. The weapon is actually said like it's a cross shield, so there's something to explore there. Maybe I don't know if there are any effects or anything that says like, okay, if your Gundam has a torpedo launcher or a Taurus cannon, then they get +1 clash point. Because this is actually called a clash point, which is both the attack and the defense of the card. Again, very simplistic, very streamlined in a way. They just kind of, maybe didn't consider the rules too much, so to say. And some of the wordings of these cards is atrocious as well. If I had to hazard a guess, there was probably somebody translating these cards in Japan, or the cards went through some sort of a translation company or somebody that maybe didn't understand some of the cards 100%. But definitely there are some discrepancies in some of the text of the cards and what some of the cards actually do. Like an amazing example for that is if we find her. Where is she? Yes. So this girl here, wow, what a useless card. All Mobile Suit cards on your Mobile Suit dock must attack. Well, you just decide to attack with your guys anyway. Yeah, I don't really see how this card could work. So there's certainly some cards that will be an effort to be saved without certainly implementing some sort of an errata. I'm not a big believer in erratas, guys. I am a believer in, when it comes to that card games or when it comes to communities trying to enhance gaming experience, like I have done with Dragon Ball CCG. My playgroup, we've implemented actually using the new Dragon Ball Super card game mulligan rules, where you start with 6 cards. If you don't like any of those 6 cards, you can shuffle them back, draw that many cards. It just makes the game a lot more playable, it's a much better experience, basically. And that's something that maybe this game could do with as well. If you have like a location card which costs 0 or 1, you can actually have that in your starting hand, but then you don't draw up to 7 cards. You actually only draw up to 6 cards plus the 1 that you chose from your deck. And that could be a really nice little way to again just bring in these locations at the end of your first turn, where you can actually play most of your cards, because you got the preliminary phase and you got attack phase, and then you got your main phase. It's a nice little system actually, and you got like a recuperation phase, which again the guys introduced mostly. You could play a 1 cost or a 0 cost battlefield from your hand first turn, and then the second turn you're like guaranteed to have an additional resource point to spend. So it's just like little observations like this. I have had a couple of test games, and I really like the basic idea of the game. I certainly am looking to get more cards at some point in the future. As I said, I do have a couple of cards on the way, so I'm probably going to review them as and when they arrive. I made a conscious decision not to review these starter decks, because I just kind of wanted to do like a conversational video about these. So let me know, guys, what you think about my ideas. Let me know if you're interested in this game or you have played it before, and I will leave a link down below to the rules video that was done by my man D, and I will leave a link down below for the fan page as well, where you can find the proxies of these cards, and hopefully we can grow the community a little bit more, and bring maybe a second renaissance for this forgotten, amazing looking card game, which is Gundam MS Wars. Peace out, YouTube. Signing out.